Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC hobby. In this video, I am going to be drawing out the firewall that I need to cut. And this is the firewall that comes with the kit. As you can see, the bolt pattern for this is not going to work with the motor that I've chosen. In fact, the gearbox of this motor can almost pass through the central hole of this firewall. So that's not going to work. Now, I am using slightly thicker material because I want to make sure there's no flexibility. I also want to make sure that when I glue this in, that it's very solid. So having a slightly thicker firewall will lend to both of those. If you look at these, I'm using a 4mm piece of fiberglass, and the original firewall is 3mm. So I'm not going up dramatically in thickness as far as the material goes. So I've measured the inside of the nose of the fuselage, and that is 38mm, but that's at the very front. As as you move backwards in the fuselage, that gets wider and wider. The firewall generally doesn't mount right inside the front. It usually mounts back a little bit. That way the bolt heads and possibly if washers are being used to mount the motor, those do not stick out in front. That way they don't risk hitting the spinner. This is 39mm, so I will be using that measurement as the size I want for this. And then when I'm going to cut it out larger than the actual size and then grind it down to fit. Because I'm using slightly thicker material and the conical shape of the fuselage, I'm going to try to bevel this edge slightly so that it gets as much surface contact as possible. Another thing that can be done to help make sure there's maximum gluing surface is put small notches around the edge. And I'll show all of that later as I go through the gluing process. But in this video, we're just drawing out the new firewall. Now, there's a few different ways to do that. And so I want to get a few measurements. I need to know how big this little central hub is. Okay, that's 6mm. It's a little under 5, but it's probably, you need a little bit of space for that to be able to fit in. So I want a drill bit that is close to 6mm for the central hole, because as you can see, there's this little bushing here that needs to pass through the firewall so that this surface here presses fully against it. Then we need to know how far apart these two holes are. So we'll measure from the outside of one to the inside of another. And I'm getting 10mm. I'm getting actually a little close to 10.5, but that's probably see. Yeah. 10mm. Let's just recap. That is I want to make sure we measure that right in close. Yeah, 6 millimeters for the inner hole, 2 holes 10 millimeters apart, and those holes need to be at least 2 millimeters in diameter for the hardware. So I'm going to start by over measuring. So again, this you want this firewall to be let's say it's 39 for this, so to allow for cutting and then sanding it down to size, always better to cut large. Let's say 42 millimeters, 1.5 millimeters of extra space. Okay, and I'm forgetting one thing I need. I'm starting by measuring a square, and the reasoning for that will become apparent in a moment. I have a good bit of light in here, but it just, for some reason, this ruler is really tough. You know what? Let's just check. Right? And right on. I'm using a Sharpie, which should be fairly permanent, but this fiberglass, as you can see, is fairly impervious. I tried pencil, doesn't do it, so hopefully this will dry and not just wipe away. Okay, the reason that I drew it as a square is, number one, I'm probably going to cut it as a square, but also I can find my center by drawing 2 lines corner to corner. Okay, so there's our center point to go from. That's a fairly fresh blade. I want to kind of scribe a little center point here. I don't want to use a punch. I don't want to damage the fiberglass. So I'm just going to twist this around a little bit and kind of auger a little bit of a hole in the center that will be used with the compass, and it'll be the center point that I drill to. So now that I've basically found center, even if that's a teeny bit off, if everything else is done from there, I really can't lose. So let's start with our largest measurement, which is going to be half of 39. Just zero that out. Half of 39 is 18.5. Okay, got 18.5. That looks good. Yeah. That's one nice thing about that. I need to push this down a little further. This is a relatively inexpensive compass, but the nice thing about it is that you can put a wide variety of styluses into it, from a pencil to this Sharpie. That doesn't have to be perfect anyway. That's just a guide. First I'll cut it out as a square, then I'll do rough cuts, getting the corner triangles off, and then I'll grind away at it and then sand to get it to the size I need. And let's just kind of confirm that we are in the right size, and there we go. That's it. So let's scribe our inner hole. Let's start with the two holes that have to be drilled for the hardware. Remember, those are 10 centimeters apart, which is 5 millimeters from the center, left and right. And I'm just going to use one of these diagonal lines. To readjust the pen there. Just check that again. Yeah, so you move the pen and your distances change. Okay. Okay, so that intersection and that intersection are the two holes that are going to mount the motor. Even though I don't need to mark it, I'm going to go ahead and do the 3 millimeter, or excuse me, it's 6, but half of that is 3. The 6 millimeter diameter, 3 millimeter radius circle for the center hole. just check that. Okay, that ended up a little large. So that. Okay, that's pretty close to 6 millimeters. So yeah, that hole is just a guideline anyway. The drill bit that I use to drill that hole will dictate that size. So now we want vent holes. So let's measure the gearbox itself. Okay, that's 16. So half of 16 is 8 millimeters. So let's throw that arc. And as long as we're doing that, let's just validate these two marks, which we wanted to be 10 millimeters apart. And that's pretty much right on the button. So now we're just getting a representation of where the gearbox is going to contact the firewall. So there's our gearbox. So now we have all this room for vent holes. And let's just measure that edge out. Okay, that's about 10 millimeters, which makes sense because that's about, that's 39 millimeters minus 10, 29, wait, I'm sorry, 15. That's odd. It's just, well, it's right on 0. Just check that. Okay, that's right. Okay, I'm going to determine the exact size of the holes by the availability of the drill bits that I have. What I'm going to opt for is 4 decent sized holes. They're going to be there. What I want to do is mark the center line for those. Okay, so what I'm doing now is, no, that's way off. Okay. Oh, I see what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is I'm scribing an intersection on this line, this line, this line, and this line that is half the distance between this circle, which represents the motor gearbox, and between this, which represents the edge of the firewall. And as long as I'm at that, I think I'm going to do 2 more lines and possibly drill 8 holes. So I'm going to mark a vertical on the center line, and a vertical, a horizontal line through the center. Go. Now I'm gonna mark those. Do hope that all dries on. So what we have now, we have the center hole, we have the 2 bolt holes, we know where the boundary for our gearbox is, we know how big the overall firewall needs to be, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 intersections where holes can be drilled to allow air to pass through the firewall. So that's it. As if that wasn't quite a bit. So as you can see, again, a demonstration like in the last video of that things are never as simple as one thinks. Something that's almost ready to fly or close to being ready to fly. Something as simple as a motor change can make for a lot more work. So anyway, I hope you learned something from this. I hope you've got some ideas for your own projects, how to take care of a situation like this. This is, again, it's G10 fiberglass. You can order it on Amazon. Some hobby stores may even keep this in stock in various sizes and thicknesses. It's good to have a little bit of this around if you need to cut out servo trays, firewalls in particular. Please click like. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you've subscribed and haven't done so, please click the little bell icon. That way you'll get a notification every time I release a new video. Thanks for watching.